You know those nights when life suddenly feels like a movie you were never ready to star in. This is one of those stories. A fictional what if that plays out like a hidden film reel, with Sandra Bullock, Keanu Reeves, and one dangerous night in Seoul that changed everything inside them. Night had already swallowed most of Seoul when Sandra stepped out of the studio doors, the city buzzing like a restless beehive around her. Neon signs blinked in colors that didn't exist back home. Scooters whined past like impatient insects, and somewhere far off a street musician was bending his soul into an old ballad Sandra didn't understand, but could feel in her chest. She pulled her coat a little tighter, grateful for the cool air on her skin after hours under hot lights. For once, there were no fans pressed against barricades, no paparazzi yelling her name, just the hum of a foreign city and the quiet ache of a woman who'd been carrying more than she let anyone see. Her assistant had begged her to wait for the car. Security had insisted on escorting her back to the hotel. But Sandra had waved them off with that practiced, easy smile people thought meant she was invincible. "It's 2 blocks," she'd said. "I'll be fine, I just need air." What she didn't say was that she was tired of always being protected, always being managed, as if she might shatter. Fame had given her a kind of armor, but it had also built a glass cage around her. Tonight she wanted to feel like a human being walking down a street, not a product being transported between sets. As she walked, the bright, busy storefronts began to thin out. The sidewalks grew narrower, the signs more local, fewer English translations under the Hangul characters. Sandra glanced at her phone, 3% battery, the map refusing to load. A faint worry pricked the back of her mind, but she pushed it down. She defilmed all over the world. She'd gotten lost in stranger cities than this and always made it back. Besides, she reminded herself, she wasn't above anyone here. She was a guest in their country. If she needed help, she'd just ask. Simple. She turned right when she should have gone left. Within minutes, the energy of the main streets faded into something quieter, heavier. The air changed. Neon gave way to dimmer signs, metal shutters halfway down over closed shops, scraps of conversation drifting from dark doorways. Somewhere, glass broke and someone laughed a little too hard afterward. Sandra slowed, a pulse of unease moving through her. She checked her phone again. Dead. "Okay," she murmured to herself, the sound of her own voice grounding her a little. "You're just a middle-aged woman who took a wrong turn, not the first, not the last. Ask for directions, be respectful, you'll be fine." A group of young men passed, jackets hanging loose, cigarettes glowing like tiny, angry stars in the dark. One of them did a double take, eyes widening in recognition before he said something rapid to his friends. They all turned to look at her, and Sandra did what she'd always done. Instead of shrinking, she smiled. Not the red carpet smile, but the small, real one she used on nervous PAs and shy fans. She bowed her head a little in the local style, a gesture of respect she'd practiced since she landed. "Annyeonghaseyo," she said softly, her accent clumsy but sincere. "Hotel Luma, direction," she mimed, walking, hands wide, drawing a rectangle in the air for a tall building. For a heartbeat, their faces softened, amused by her attempt at their language. But something in their eyes didn't relax the way she was used to. One of them muttered a name under his breath, a name that rippled through the group like a warning. They weren't just random kids hanging out. There was a structure to how they moved, who stood front, who hung slightly behind. Sandra had played enough cops and criminals to recognize a hierarchy when she saw one. One of them stepped forward, his hair slicked back, silver tie reflecting the little light there was. He was older than the rest, maybe early 40s, his suit too sharp for a casual night out. His face held that calm, dangerous stillness of someone who never needed to raise his voice to be heard. "You are Sandra Bullock," he said in accented but careful English. It wasn't a question. She felt her stomach tighten. She kept her posture relaxed. "Yes, hello, I'm a little lost. My hotel is..." He raised one hand gently and she stopped talking. Not because he threatened her, but because of the precision in the gesture. The air around them seemed to narrow. "What are you doing here?" he asked, not curious, annoyed, suspicious. Sandra took a breath. This was where kindness mattered, she reminded herself, where humility wasn't just a word in interviews, but a choice. "I'm sorry," she said. "I finished work late. I thought I could walk. I took the wrong street. It's my fault. I don't mean any disrespect." One of the younger men scoffed under his breath. The man with the silver tie didn't react, but his eyes sharpened, assessing her the way a chess player sizes up the board. "You come to our city," he said slowly. "You close streets, you bring cameras, noise, foreigners. My people cannot open their shops. My friends lose money. But you walk alone here like you own it." His words hit harder than she expected. She thought of the trucks, the gear, the loud English instructions echoing down narrow alleys during the day. The production had tried to be careful, but they came with money and deadlines. They always did. She de-thanked the locals, signed autographs, given that gentle speech about being grateful guests. But she hadn't been out here at midnight when the lights went off and the city tried to patch itself back together. "I don't own anything here," she said quietly. "I'm just an actress. I really am sorry if we caused trouble." He tilted his head like he was considering whether she believed that. "In my neighborhood," he said, "nothing happens by accident. The foreigners don't come without permission." His gaze flicked to his men, then back to her. "You understand what I am saying?" That was when the word slipped out from one of the younger ones in Korean, a word she'd heard in rumors, in scared whispers from crew members talking about local protection. A word that meant something between businessman and predator, the kind of man who turned whole city blocks into property lines only he could see. Mafia. The air thickened in her lungs. This was not a movie scene with a stunt coordinator 2 feet away. This was a narrow street in a city that did not know her, in a circle of men whose lives she didn't understand, whose losses and anger might have been building long before she walked into them. Panic clawed at the edges of her mind, but beneath it was something else. Stubbornness, maybe. Or the years of playing brave women until, somewhere along the way, some of that bravery had started to stick. She straightened just a tiny bit, not defiant, steady. "I understand you're angry," she said, her voice even only because she forced it to be. "But punishing me alone in this alley isn't going to fix what they did to your neighborhood. Let me call someone from the production. Let me." "You think your people will fix this?" he interrupted, a dry amusement crossing his face. "They pay a fee, they film, they leave, my people stay." He stepped closer, and the others subtly closed the circle around her. Her heart pounded so loud she could hear it in her ears, but she held her ground. "Look," she said, swallowing hard. "In my country, too, big productions come in, they use a place, then they go, and people get hurt, small businesses, real lives. I know what that looks like. I agree with it. I don't want to be that person for you." He studied her, as if weighing how much of that was performance and how much was raw. Sandra felt strangely exposed, not as a celebrity, but as a woman who'd spent years trying to stay kind and grounded in a world that rewarded the opposite. "You speak nicely," he said at last, "like the nun from the old movies." His smile didn't reach his eyes, but nice words don't change who has power. He reached up, 2 fingers lightly brushing a strand of hair away from her face. The touch was soft, but it carried something cold under it, ownership, decision. The men behind him shifted, watching. "Tonight," he said, his voice almost gentle, "you stay with us, we talk, we show you how things work here. Then maybe your people will learn to respect my streets." Her mouth went dry. Images flashed, tabloids, scandal, frightened crew members, her team back in the hotel counting on her to be safe and predictable. But under that deeper was something more personal, the knowledge that if she let fear dictate everything, if she bowed and begged now, she might never trust her own courage again. And yet courage, she knew, didn't always mean fighting. Sometimes it meant choosing exactly the right words to get everyone out alive. "Please," she said softly, searching his face for even the smallest crack in the armor. "You don't need to do this. I'll listen. I'll help however I can, but not like this. Not by taking me." For a moment, the street held its breath. The man with the silver tie regarded her as if she were a puzzle no one had prepared him to solve. A famous woman with tired eyes who still chose politeness over arrogance, calm over hysteria. Something flickered in his expression, then hardened again. "You still think you have a choice," he murmured. He raised his hand, an almost casual gesture, and one of the men stepped closer behind her. Sandra felt her muscles tense, her mind beginning to race through every possible move she could make, run, shout, fight, comply. All of them felt equally impossible. She was alone, outnumbered, a stranger in a language she barely spoke, and still some small stubborn spark inside her refused to collapse. She opened her mouth, To argue, to plead, she wasn't even sure, when a voice cut through the night from just beyond the circle. The tone was calm, low, spoken in clear, unhurried Korean. The effect was instant. The grip of the man behind her loosened a fraction. Heads turned. The tension didn't vanish, but it shifted, redirected toward the newcomer stepping into the edge of the neon glow. Sandra didn't understand the words, but she recognized the cadence. Respectful, firm, the way you talk to someone dangerous when you aren't afraid of them, but you understand exactly who they are. The men parted slightly, enough for her to see a tall figure in a dark jacket, hair a little messy, eyes steady. He switched to English, his voice the same quiet she remembered from decades ago, on a different set, in an entirely different life. "Sandra," he said, "don't move." For a second, her mind refused to believe what her eyes were telling her. But there he was, unmistakable even in the half-light. Keanu Reeves stood at the mouth of the alley, looking straight at her, calm, focused, and carrying a kind of gentle steel in his gaze that made even the man with the silver tie pause. And in that suspended heartbeat, with danger still pressing in on all sides, Sandra felt something she hadn't felt since she stepped out of the studio doors. The sudden, dizzy possibility that she wasn't alone after all. For a heartbeat, the alley tilted, past and present folding together. Sandra's mind jumped back to a bus on speed, to a young man with gentle eyes and a quiet, deliberate way of speaking. Now he stood between her and a line of men who didn't look easily impressed. Keanu didn't rush forward. He stepped in slowly, hands where everyone could see them, shoulders loose, like a man who understood that sudden movements could start wars. He spoke first in Korean again, looking at the man in the silver tie, not at the younger ones puffing themselves up behind him. "I'm sorry," he said in their language, voice low and respectful. "We should not have walked into your street like this. This is your home." The boss studied him, that same measuring look he'd given Sandra. Up close, Keanu could see the tiny details, the tired lines around the man's eyes, the faint scar along his jaw, the stiffness of someone who carried more than his own weight. There was nothing cartoonish about him. He was a man who had clearly done things he didn't brag about. "You speak well," the boss answered in Korean, glancing briefly at Sandra, then back to Keanu. "For a foreigner with bodyguards and trailers." "I left my bodyguards at the hotel," Keanu said, still calm. "I heard Sandra was walking alone. I followed. That was my choice. If someone is to blame tonight, it's me." Sandra turned her head slightly, surprise flickering through the fear. He'd noticed. He'd come after her, no cameras, no publicity, just showing up. The boss almost smiled at that, but there was no warmth in it. "You think I don't know who you are, Mr. Reeves?" he asked, switching to careful English. "Your people met with my people when you arrived. You pay for security, for silence, for cooperation. You make trouble, then you make deals." Keanu nodded once, not arguing. "I know, and I know that's not the same as respect." He glanced around, taking in the shuttered shops, the narrow doors. "We forget there are lives behind these doors. That's on us." The younger men shifted, thrown off by the lack of defensiveness. They were used to arrogance, excuses, or fear. This steady acceptance made the script harder to follow. Sandra found her voice again. "He's right," she added quietly. "We don't see everything you lose, but taking it out on me in this alley, that won't fix anything either. I'm not the one who signed those contracts." The boss lifted his hand slightly, silencing his own men before their temper flared. "You both talk as if words are enough," he said. "My brother's bar closed last month. Your trucks blocked his street for weeks. Customers stopped coming. The landlord raised the rent, said a foreign production wanted the building. Now my brother works for me, whether he likes it or not. Is that your idea of just business?" Guilt hit Sandra like a physical thing. She could see it. The cheerful bar that used to stand here, the sudden emptiness when a location scout waved a bigger check. She thought of her own brother, of the people she'd tried to protect over the years. Fame had given her tools, but it had also made her blind to the quiet damage rolling behind her wherever she worked. "What happened to your brother is wrong," Keanu said simply. "If I had known." "You didn't care to know," the boss cut in. There was no shouting, just a razor edge to the words. "No one does until someone they like is in a dark alley." The circle tightened again. The man behind Sandra was close enough now that she could feel his breath on her hair. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to fight, to do something. But another part of her, sharper, older, whispered that panic here would only feed the fire. Keanu's gaze locked on the boss. "Then let us know now," he said. "All of it, not as a deal, as a debt. We can't change what's already happened, but we can stop pretending we're not responsible." The boss tilted his head, curiosity finally cutting through the anger. This wasn't the script he expected either. "You want to take her away from here?" he asked. "Yes," Keanu answered, "safely tonight." A long silence. Somewhere a scooter whined past at the end of the alley, then faded. The boss slipped his hands into his pockets, considering. When he spoke, his voice was almost soft. "Then you both come with me now," he said. "No calls, no bodyguards. You listen to my story. You look my people in the eye. And tomorrow you stand beside me when I speak to your producers." He took one step closer until the three of them formed a tight, tense triangle. "If you walk away after that," he added, eyes locked on Keanu's, "I will make sure this alley will not be the only place your names are whispered in this city." Sandra's breath caught. This wasn't just about tonight anymore. This was about everything that would follow them after the film wrapped, after they flew home, after everyone else forgot. Keanu didn't look at her. He didn't need to. She could see the answer forming on his face before he said it. "Then we stay," he replied quietly, "both of us." Sandra felt her world tilt, fear and respect crashing together in her chest as the boss nodded once and turned, gesturing for them to follow him deeper into the narrowing streets. They walked without speaking, flanked by the boss's men. The farther they went, the more the city changed. Bright LED signs gave way to older bulbs, their light a tired yellow. Laundry hung on lines above the street, television flickers danced behind thin curtains, and the smell of frying oil and old cigarettes mixed in the air like a second skin. Sandra's heart wouldn't slow, but her eyes were open now, noticing small things she'd never have seen from a blacked-out SUV. A child's bicycle chained to a pole with peeling paint, a tiny shrine wedged between two shops, photos of missing pets stapled to a post. Lives pressed close together, making room where there wasn't any. They stopped in front of a narrow doorway with a faded sign in Korean. The metal shutter was half pulled down, graffiti scrawled across the bottom. The boss lifted it with one hand, revealing a dim bar inside. Scarred wooden tables, a long counter, bottles lined up like soldiers on tired duty. "This was my brother's place," he said, holding the shutter high as they ducked under, "before the foreign cameras came." Inside, the air was thick with old smoke and memories. Someone flicked on the lights. The room glowed a dull amber. On one wall, pinned in a crooked collage, were photographs. Families laughing, birthday cakes, karaoke nights, clusters of people raising cheap glasses and grinning like the world outside didn't exist. A man in his late 30s stood behind the bar, wiping it out of habit though there was no one to serve. His eyes widened when he saw Sandra and Keanu, then narrowed as they flicked to his brother. "It's them," he said in Korean. "From the set, what are you doing?" "They're listening," the boss answered. "Sit." They took places at a table near the wall of photos. Sandra's hands rested lightly on the scarred wood. She felt like she'd stepped into someone's living room uninvited and knocked over their favorite lamp. The boss didn't start with threats. He started with stories. He talked about growing up in these streets when they were poorer but somehow kinder. He talked about his father's tiny shop, about loans and promises, about bigger businesses pushing in when the city modernized. He described watching his father's face the day the bank took the keys, how something small but important died in the man's eyes. "After that," he said quietly, "I learned that the people with contracts and nice suits always win, unless someone like me sits at the gate." His work with the family started small, keeping dealers away from schools, helping old shopkeepers push back when landlords got greedy. Then the line blurred. Protection became tax, tax became control. He said it all without boasting, just a long road that had led him here to this bar that used to be his brother's. "My brother believed people would keep coming," the boss said. He believed laughter was enough, but laughs don't pay the rent, not when your trucks block the door for weeks. Tourists took pictures of your actors outside. No one came inside. Sandra swallowed hard. She pictured a quiet man behind this same bar, watching his regulars lose patience, watching strangers pose for selfies 15 feet from his empty stools. "I didn't know," she whispered. It sounded small in the space between them. "No," the boss agreed. "You didn't want to know, not until tonight." Before she could answer, a door at the back of the bar creaked open. A teenage girl stepped out, headphones around her neck, dark hair pulled into a messy bun. She froze when she saw the table, her uncle, her father, two world-famous faces sitting under the soft bar light. Her eyes went wide, then wider, flicking from Sandra to Keanu and back again. The poster on her phone case, half visible as she clutched it, showed a much younger Sandra in a bus, hair flying, eyes wild. Speed. "Appa," she breathed in Korean, looking at her father with something like betrayal. "What are you doing to them?" The boss's expression shifted, only a fraction. "Go back to your room," he said quietly. The girl didn't move. She looked at Sandra, and there it was, pure, unfiltered awe mixed with disappointment. "She's the reason I learned English," she said, voice breaking. "You told me their movies were lies, but they taught me to dream about something else." Sandra's chest tightened. This was the part of fame she understood, the strange responsibility to strangers she would never meet. It hit different when the stranger's eyes were this wet, this close. "How long have you been here?" Keanu asked gently, switching back to English for her. "Since we lost the bar," she answered, accent careful but fluent. "Uncle asked my father to work for him, said it was safer than starving. Now I watch your trailers from the window while they argue about money downstairs." The boss didn't interrupt. He watched his daughter, jaw working, something raw cracking beneath his control. Sandra leaned forward, ignoring the men around them, focusing only on the girl. "I'm sorry," she said, and it wasn't the polished apology she was used to giving in press conferences. "Not just for the bar, for walking through your life without seeing it. That's on me too." The girl's eyes filled. "I don't want you to be sorry," she said. "I just want you to stop letting them break everything and then fly away." Silence settled over the table. Keanu reached into his jacket, pulled out a folded piece of paper, and placed it on the wood between them. Numbers were scribbled on it, along with Korean writing in someone else's hand. "I met with a local lawyer when we started shooting," he said to the boss. "I asked how we could give something back that wasn't just a donation for headlines. Half my fee for this movie is sitting in a fund for this neighborhood, but your city and my studio keep arguing over who gets to control it." He met the man's eyes, steady. "I will sign it over to your people directly. No studio conditions, no press, if you'll let it build something real here." Sandra stared at him. "Half your fee," she repeated quietly. "Keanu." He shrugged, almost apologetic. "I don't have a family to leave it to," he said. "Not anymore." A shadow passed through his eyes, gone as quickly as it came. "But I can choose not to look away." The boss picked up the paper slowly, reading the numbers, the name of the local foundation, the lawyer's stamp. His thumb pressed so hard into the corner it bent. "And what do you want in return?" he asked, voice like gravel. Keanu shook his head. "That you let her walk out of here tonight," he said, nodding towards Sandra. "And that tomorrow you stand next to us when we tell our people what really happened to your brother's bar." The girl looked from her father to her uncle, then to Sandra and Keanu, caught between worlds that suddenly felt much closer than they had that morning. The boss leaned back, paper still in his hand, his eyes moving from his daughter's frightened hope to the two actors waiting without flinching. "You realize," he said slowly, "if your studio hears you did this without them, they might throw you both off this film." Keanu's answer was simple: "Then they throw us off." Sandra felt the room tilt again. Every agent, every contract, every warning she'd ever heard about being difficult flashed through her mind. So did the image of the empty bar, the quiet disappointment in the girl's eyes, the way the boss's hands shook just a little as he held the paper. She exhaled, long and slow, then looked straight at the man in the silver tie. "If he's out," she said, voice firming, "I'm out." The boss stared at her for a long, long moment, weighing the weight of those words, the power they carried, the risk they held. And somewhere between his daughter's trembling breath and the number on that crumpled paper, something in his face finally changed. Morning came gray and heavy, like the city itself wasn't sure how the day would go. The meeting wasn't in a studio office, but in a cramped community hall that smelled like instant coffee and floor cleaner. Plastic chairs lined the walls. A whiteboard squeaked every time someone wrote another name or number. On one side of the room, producers, location managers, a studio lawyer with a too-tight tie, and a PR woman already typing statements in her head. On the other side, shop owners, apartment residents, the brother from the bar, a few tired faces from night shifts. In the center stood the boss, jacket off, sleeves rolled, his presence quieter in daylight but no less solid. Sandra and Keanu stood slightly off to the side, close enough to be seen, far enough to show they were listening more than leading. The argument started fast. "We've followed every city regulation," the studio lawyer insisted, tapping a stack of permits. "We've paid all agreed fees to local partners." His eyes flicked toward the boss as he said that last part, the word partners carrying a hint of judgment. "And my brother still lost his bar," the boss said coolly. "Your papers do not show that." The location manager jumped in defensive. "With respect, that landlord decision had nothing to do with us. The city." "The city was promised tourist money," one of the shop owners cut in. "You told us business would grow. It has not." Voices rose, fingers pointed. Someone from the studio side suggested moving shooting to a different district. Someone from the neighborhood side asked who would pay their lost rent this month, not next year. It was the same tired script, different players. Sandra listened, jaw tight, something hardening inside her. She sat through so many of these meetings over the years, always at a slight distance, protected by people who said, "We'll handle it." But handling it had left a closed bar and a girl watching movie trailers through cracked glass. Keanu stepped forward first, waiting for a brief lull before he spoke. "We're not here to pretend this is simple," he said, his voice quiet enough that people had to lean in. "We're here because last night we finally saw how complicated we've made your lives." The room shifted. Everyone knew who he was. The cameras near the back held by local reporters knew, too. This story had gotten out faster than any of them expected. Sandra caught the eye of the PR woman, who looked like she was silently screaming. Risk, scandal, uncontrollable narratives. She could see it all flickering behind the woman's eyes. The safe move would be to let Keanu talk in vague words and then slide back behind the studio's version. Instead, Sandra stepped up beside him and took the mic from the folding stand without asking. "I've been in this business a long time," she said, scanning the room, letting her nervousness sit there instead of hiding it. "Long enough to know that I benefit from things I don't even see. Extra security, closed streets, discounts, doors that open because of my name, but none of that means anything if the door I open for myself slams in someone else's face." The brother from the bar met her eyes, arms folded, hurt still close to the surface. The teenage girl sat beside him, fingers twisted together, watching everything. "We came here to tell you we're not comfortable pretending your losses are just background noise," Sandra continued. "So we're asking our studio to do something different, not as a favor but as a responsibility." The studio head, patched in on a screen from Lowe's Angels, finally spoke, irritation barely masked. "Sandra, with all due respect, this is a location issue. We hire local companies to handle these things. If there were problems, they should have been raised through proper channels, not nighttime negotiations with criminal elements." A few people flinched at the word criminal. The boss didn't react, but his jaw set. Keanu answered before Sandra could. "He's not a channel," he said evenly. "He's a result. When we leave people to fend for themselves against systems too big to fight, someone like him steps in. We can judge that, or we can admit we helped create the space he filled." The room went very still at that. The studio head's smile was tight. "So what are you proposing?" he asked. "Exactly." Sandra glanced at the boss, then back at the screen. Her heart thudded, but her voice stayed even. That we take part of the production budget and the neighborhood fund Keanu set up, and we put it under a local board that includes residents, she said. Not just middlemen. They decide what gets rebuilt, whose rent is supported, how to turn this into something sustainable when we're gone. And we change the rest of our shoot. Fewer blocked streets, more hiring from this area, fewer night shoots outside people's homes. You're asking us to hand creative and financial control to random shop owners, the studio head replied, incredulous. I'm asking you to share it, Sandra said, or I'm asking you to do this film without me. The words dropped like a stone into deep water. The room rippled. Keanu nodded once, same for me. The studio head leaned back, calculating. You're under contract, he reminded them. Walking away would mean lawsuits. You'd lose your fees, your reputations would take a hit. We'd finish without you. Sandra's mouth was dry, but there was a strange calm underneath it all. For years, she'd been afraid of being labeled difficult, of losing work, of becoming a story at parties about an actress who thought she mattered too much. But last night in that bar, she'd met someone whose entire life had been rearranged by the casual sweep of their industry's hand. Maybe it was time she worried a little less about parties. Then you replace us, she said, but you'll do it in front of these people on record with them knowing exactly why. The boss watched her, eyes narrowed, as if trying to see if this was a performance or something real cracking through the surface. And if they decide not to work with you without us, Keanu added, glancing at the neighborhood side, what then? For a moment no one moved. Futures hung in the air, movies canceled, careers bent, headlines that would not be kind. The studio head sighed, rubbed his forehead, and delivered what was meant to be the killing blow. Fine, he said. If this neighborhood means more than your contracts, walk. We'll write you out, recast, reshoot. There are other banks, other streets, other cities. You won't stop this machine. All eyes turned to Sandra and Keanu. In the second before either of them spoke, the boss's daughter lifted her phone, thumb hovering over the record button, hoping they wouldn't flinch. Sandra met Keanu's gaze, everything they'd built separately over decades of work and restraint hanging in the space between them. Then, with a small nod to each other, they both opened their mouths to answer. I'll take the hit, Sandra said first. The room rustled, people shifting in their plastic chairs. On the screen, the studio head leaned closer as if he'd misheard. I've had more chances than I ever deserved, she continued. More roles, more paydays, more safety nets. If it costs me this film to stand here and say we can't keep doing this, then I'll live with that. Keanu's voice followed, low and steady. Same answer, he said. Suing me won't give you back the days you've already shot, but if I stay quiet because I'm scared, I don't deserve the life this industry gave me in the first place. For a second, all the noise in the room fell away. They weren't icons or assets or headlines. They were just two people choosing where to stand. Fear crawled up Sandra's spine anyway. She thought of her kids, of the people who depended on her, of the long line of moments when she'd quietly gone along instead of speaking, telling herself she'd make up for it next time. There was always a next time, until suddenly there was. Beside her, Keanu's hands were loose at his sides, but his mind was full of faces. Friends gone too soon, chances wasted, the quiet regrets that had driven him to live simply, to give away more than he kept. He'd learned the hard way how fragile everything was. That fragility made the choice easier, not harder. The studio head started to respond, but a buzz cut through his audio. A notification ping on one of the producer's phones, then another, then a murmur rippling from the back of the room. The local reporter who'd been filming lifted his camera higher, as if pulled by a current. The boss's daughter's video, shaky, grainy, and utterly real, had already hit social media. Two world-famous actors standing in a crammed neighborhood hall, saying they'd walk away from a major film rather than ignore the damage it was doing. No publicist polish, no staged lighting, just raw risk. In minutes, Korean comments flooded in. Then English, Spanish, Portuguese, clips were reposted, subtitled, argued over. Some called it a stunt, others called it a turning point, but whatever people called it, they were watching. The PR woman's phone wouldn't stop vibrating now. Her face went pale as she scrolled. The studio head glanced off screen, clearly getting updates of his own. The balance in the room shifted just a hair. One of the neighborhood elders stood, hands trembling slightly. "I don't know much about movies," she said, voice thin but steady. "But if these two are willing to lose so much for us, maybe we can meet you in the middle." She turned to the boss. "We are tired of being scared of everyone with power. The city, the landlords, you. If there's a chance to build something different, I want to try." The boss's jaw worked. Hearing that "you" in the same breath as city and landlords cut deeper than he showed. He had told himself for years he was different, necessary, a protector. Somewhere along the way, he'd stopped noticing when protection turned into fear. He thought of his daughter watching trailers from the window, of his brother's bar dark and silent, of the paper with numbers now burning a hole in his pocket. "This board you want," he said slowly, looking at Sandra and Keanu. "Residents, my brother, shop owners, maybe a lawyer who is not already in someone's pocket." His eyes narrowed. "And one seat for me, not as your paid partner, as a man who knows how this neighborhood really works." The studio lawyer opened his mouth to object, but the studio head raised a hand, suddenly less sure of himself in the tidal wave of online attention and local pressure. "And you too," the boss added, turning to Sandra and Keanu. "You will not just sign papers and disappear. You will come back, not as stars, but as people who helped break and helped fix." "We'll come back," Keanu said quietly. "No cameras, no premieres, just flights with no one noticing us for once." Sandra nodded. "And if we start to forget, you call us, you remind us," loudly. The studio head exhaled, seeing the tide turning and calculating how much it would cost to swim against it. His expression shifted from rigid to resigned. "If we do this," he said slowly, "we'll need to restructure the schedule, adjust the budget, explain this to investors. It's messy." "So is this neighborhood right now?" Sandra replied. "We're just asking you to admit it." Another notification pinged, then another. A trending topic crawled across the bottom of someone's live stream, "Stand with Seoul Street." The studio head looked directly into the camera, into the eyes of two actors who had just dared him to show what kind of man he was, and what kind of company he ran. "Fine," he said at last. "We pilot this here, limited board power, transparent accounts. If it works, we can talk about a formal program for future shoots. If it turns into a circus, we pull the plug." It wasn't perfect, it wasn't everything, but it was a crack in a wall that had felt solid for decades. The boss inclined his head, an old habit of giving and taking ground. "Then we try," he said. As the room began to buzz with details, names for the board, dates for the first meeting, line items to be adjusted, Sandra stepped back, the adrenaline finally starting to drain, leaving a shaky tenderness in its wake. She felt a hand lightly touch her elbow. "Keanu." "You okay?" he asked. She laughed once, a short, unsteady sound. "No," she admitted, "but I think I will be." He nodded. "Me too." Across the room, the teenage girl slid her phone into her pocket, eyes shining, cheeks flushed. She caught her father's eye, the question clear. "Did you really just chain?" He didn't answer out loud. Instead, he walked towards Sandra and Keanu, each step looking heavier and freer at the same time, as if he were stepping out of a role he'd been playing for too long. When he reached them, he stopped, searching for the right words. "I will keep my men off your streets," he said quietly. "Not because you scared me, because you saw us. If you forget that, if your people forget." He paused, the old edge flashing for a brief second. "Then we will have another conversation." Sandra nodded, oddly grateful for the warning. It meant he was taking this as seriously as she was. He hesitated, then added softer, "My daughter, she wants to shake your hand. If that's still something she wants after seeing all of this." Sandra's throat tightened. "It is for me," she said. As the girl approached, timid and wide-eyed, the weight of everything that had happened pressed down and lifted at the same time. This was bigger than one film, one street, one career. It was messy and human and fragile. And it was just beginning.